The train wheezed to a stop through sheets of snow, its black iron body shuddering against the Wyoming cold. Clara Hollins gripped her worn leather valise tighter, watching through the fogged window, as Fox Hollow revealed itself a scatter of wooden buildings hunched against the storm like old men at prayer. She was the last to descend, her long wool coat catching the wind as she stepped onto the platform. At 5 feet 10 inches in her boots, Clara stood eye to eye with most men, a fact that had followed her like a shadow all her life. The other passengers hurried past, heads bent against the driving snow, eager for warmth and shelter. Clara searched the platform for Patrick Gentry. He'd described himself in his letters: medium height, brown hair, kind eyes behind wire spectacles. A widowed doctor who needed a strong woman to help run his practice, someone who wouldn't faint at the sight of blood or balk at hard work. "Your letters speak of capability and intelligence," he'd written. "These qualities matter more to me than conventional beauty." The platform emptied. Snow gathered on her shoulders and the dark coils of her hair where it escaped her bonnet. The station master emerged from his office, pulling his coat tight. "Ma'am, you waiting on someone?" "Dr. Patrick Gentry. He was to meet me." The man's weathered face shifted, something like pity crossing his features. "Doc Gentry." "He left a letter. Said to give it to the tall woman from Pennsylvania." He retreated into his office, returning with an envelope that had already collected moisture from the storm. Clara's fingers, stiff with cold, fumbled with the seal. The letter was brief. Asterisk, Miss Hollins. I have reconsidered our arrangement. Upon reflection, I believe you would be too much for Fox Hollow, and for me. I have made other arrangements. P. Gentry, asterisk. Too much. The words struck her chest like stones. Too tall, too strong, too direct in her manner, too willing to speak her mind. She'd heard variations her whole life. In Philadelphia, where she'd worked in the textile mills, the other women whispered that she was mannish. The men either mocked her or feared her. Even her own mother had sighed over her, lamenting that God had given her a son's body and a daughter's heart. "Ma'am?" The station master hovered. "Storm's getting worse. You got somewhere to go." Clara folded the letter with careful precision, though her hands trembled. Not from cold. "Is there a boarding house?" "Sss, Mrs. Winters runs a place 2 blocks down. Clean rooms, fair price." He paused, "though she's particular about her guests." Particular. Clara knew what that meant. She'd encountered particular landladies before. "Thank you." She lifted her valise and stepped into the storm. Fox Hollow's main street was a river of mud and snow-wooden sidewalks slick with ice. Clara passed the general store, a saloon spilling yellow light and rough laughter, a church with a crooked steeple. Her boots, good Pennsylvania leather, were soaked through by the time she found the boarding house, a narrow building wedged between a barber shop and a bakery. The door opened to warmth and the smell of pot roast. A woman emerged from the background, an aproned graying hair pulled tight. Her welcoming smile faltered when she looked up and up at Clara. "I need a room," Clara said before the woman could speak. "I can pay a week in advance." Mrs. Winters' mouth pursed. "I run a respectable establishment for respectable ladies." "I am respectable." "You're—" The woman gestured vaguely at Clara's height, her broad shoulders, her hands that had known work. "I don't cater to that sort. You'd be better off at the Antler. They take anyone." The Antler was the saloon. Clara had passed its doors, heard the piano, and smelled the whiskey and cheap perfume. She straightened her spine, a gesture so familiar it was reflex. "I see. Thank you for your time." Back in the street, the storm had worsened. Snow drove horizontal, stinging her face. Clara considered her options. The train wouldn't return until morning. She had money enough for a hotel if Fox Hollow possessed such a thing. She could try the church, throw herself on Christian charity. Or she could walk back to the station, spend the night on a bench, and take the first train east. Return to Philadelphia, to the mills, to the whispers and the loneliness and the life she'd thought she was leaving behind. No, she'd sold everything for this chance. Endured weeks of correspondence with a man who'd seemed to see her as more than her unusual frame. She wouldn't retreat at the first sign of the same old rejections. Clara trudged through the snow, searching for any establishment that might offer shelter. The few people she passed gave her quick, startled glances. A woman alone in a storm, too tall, too strange, too much. The Frontier Inn sat at the far end of town, a 2-story building that had seen better decades. The clerk, a thin man with pomaded hair, looked her over with the practiced assessment of someone who judged travelers for a living. "I need a room for the night. $3. It was robbery twice what Mrs. Winters would have charged, but Clara was too cold and too tired to argue. She placed the money on the counter. The clerk slid it back. "Actually, we're full up." Clara looked pointedly at the row of keys hanging behind him. "All those rooms are taken." "They are now." His smile was oily. "Storm brings all sorts looking for shelter. We have to maintain standards." The words Clara wanted to say burned her throat. Words about standards and decency and the cruelty of small men with small power. Instead, she picked up her money with fingers nearly numb and walked back into the storm. She found herself at the church, a modest Methodist building with light glowing through simple windows. The door was unlocked. Inside, wooden pews stood empty, a potbelly stove radiating blessed warmth. Clara sank into the back row, her wet coat dripping onto worn floorboards. "Lord," she whispered to the cross at the altar, "I didn't ask to be made this way." The door opened behind her. She expected the minister, perhaps, or a caretaker come to shoo her out. Instead, a man filled the doorway, tall enough that he had to duck his head broad-shouldered beneath a buffalo coat crusted with snow. He pulled back his hood, revealing dark hair shot with premature gray and a face weathered by wind and sun. He took in Clara with a glance, her wet clothes, her valise, the defeat she couldn't quite hide. Without speaking, he moved to the stove, adding wood from the pile beside it. "Storm's getting worse," he said finally. His voice was deep, roughened. "You got somewhere to go." Clara's laugh was bitter. "Apparently not. The boarding house doesn't cater to women like me. The inn is suddenly full." The man turned from the stove. This close, she could see his eyes were gray as the storm outside. He studied her without the usual reactions. No surprise at her height, no discomfort, no judgment. Patrick Gentry's woman from the train. Heat flooded Clara's face. "Not his woman, not anymore." "Heard he was bringing someone in. Also heard he left town this morning on the early stage." The man's expression darkened. "Coward's way." Clara said nothing. What was there to say that she'd been foolish to trust letters, to believe someone could want her as she was? The man pulled on his hood. "My cabin's a mile out of town. It's rough, but it's warm and dry. You can have the bed. I'll take the chair." Clara stared. "You don't know me." "Know you came here on a promise that got broken. Know you're too proud to beg and too smart to stay in this storm." He moved toward the door. "I don't like seeing anyone left out in the cold, but the choice is yours." He waited, patient as stone. Clara thought of her options a night in the church, hoping no one drove her out. Another attempt at finding shelter facing more rejections. Or trusting this stranger whose eyes held no mockery, whose offer asked nothing but acceptance. She stood gathering her valise. "I don't even know your name." "Jonah Rourke." He opened the church door to the waiting storm. "We should go. It'll be dark soon and the path gets treacherous." Clara followed him into the snow, into the unknown, leaving behind the town that had already decided she was too much. As they walked, Jonah slightly ahead, breaking trail through the deepening drifts, she noticed he adjusted his pace to match hers. A small courtesy unconsciously given. Perhaps she thought, pulling her coat tighter against the wind, not everyone in Fox Hollow measured a woman's worth by conventional standards. Perhaps some people understood that surviving required more than delicate beauty and demure manners. The storm howled around them, but for the first time since reading Patrick's letter, Clara felt something besides cold and humiliation. Not hope, that was too grand a word, but a tiny flame of possibility carefully guarded against the wind. Morning came gray and bitter, the storm having blown itself out in the night. Clara woke to unfamiliar walls, rough-hewn logs chinked with mud, and the smell of coffee brewing. For a moment she couldn't place herself. Then memory rushed back. The train, Patrick's letter, the stranger who'd offered shelter. Jonah Rourke sat by the stove whittling a piece of pine. He'd kept his word, spending the night in the chair. His buffalo coat served as his blanket, and Clara noticed he'd added her still damp coat to the line he'd strung near the stove. "Coffee's ready," he said without looking up. "There's cornbread from yesterday and some preserved peaches." Clara sat up, aware of her disheveled state. Her hair had come loose from its pins, falling in dark waves past her shoulders. She'd slept in her dress, now wrinkled beyond repair. But Jonah kept his eyes on his whittling, granting her the privacy of inattention. "I should go back to town," Clara said after she'd eaten. "See about the next train east." "That what you want to go back?" She considered lying, preserving what dignity remained. But something about this man, this rough cabin where she'd slept unmolested, invited truth. "No, but Fox Hollow has made its opinion clear." Jonah set down his knife. "Fox Hollow's opinion isn't the only one that matters. You came here to work, didn't you? Gentry said he needed help with his practice." He reconsidered. The bitterness crept back into her voice. "Said I'd be too much." "His loss. But there's other work. Town's growing. The mercantile needs clerks. The telegraph office is looking for operators. Mrs. Chen runs a laundry and always needs reliable help." Clara almost smiled. "And would they hire a woman like me? Too tall, too strong, too able to reach the high shelves and lift heavy loads?" Jonah interrupted. "Too capable of working a full day without fainting spells. Seems to me those are advantages." She studied him, this bear of a man who spoke sense as if it were common. "Why are you helping me?" He resumed whittling. "Maybe because I know what it's like to not fit what people expect. Maybe because I believe folks should be judged on what they do, not how they look." He paused. "Or maybe I just don't like waste, and sending you back east would be wasteful." Clara stood needing movement. The cabin was sparse but clean, one room with a bed, a table, 2 chairs and shelves lined with supplies. No woman's touch anywhere, no softness except the quilts on the bed. "Your wife doesn't mind you bringing home strays?" "No wife. Never found a woman who wanted this life half wiled away from town gossip and social calls." "And if I said I'd take my chances in town, try for work?" Jonah nodded. "Then I'd walk you back, make sure you get fair treatment. Tom Chen's a good man he'd hire based on work, not appearance. Same with Samuel Hart at the mercantile. He stood towering over her despite her height. But you should know the talk's already started. Gentry made sure of that before he left. Told folks you were unnatural, that he'd saved the town from embarrassment." Fury, hot and familiar, rose in Clara's chest. "Unnatural, because I'm tall." "Because you're not what they expect. Because you make them uncomfortable." Jonah pulled on his coat. "Question is, do you care more about their comfort or your life?" Clara thought of Philadelphia, of years spent making herself smaller, quieter, less. Of the loneliness that came from constantly apologizing for existing. She'd traveled 2,000 miles to escape that life. "I'll try for work." The walk back to Fox Hollow was different in daylight. The storm had transformed the landscape into pristine white, erasing the mud and shabbiness. Jonah walked beside her, his presence changing the equation. People stared, but differently curious rather than dismissive. At Chen's laundry, Thomas Chen looked up from his ledgers. His wife Ming sorted linens with practiced efficiency. Both were small, compact people who'd faced their own share of Fox Hollow's particular opinions. "Mr. Rourke," Thomas nodded. "Miss Hollins, Clara Hollins, I'm looking for work." Thomas exchanged glances with his wife. Ming stepped forward, barely reaching Clara's shoulder, and examined her hands, checking for signs of hard work of capability. "You know, washing, ironing, mending?" "Yes, ma'am, all of it. I worked in textile mills back east." "Show me," Ming gestured to a pile of shirts. "Iron one." Clara removed her gloves, selected an iron from the stove, tested its heat with practiced ease. Her large hands moved with surprising delicacy, coaxing wrinkles from cotton, creating crisp lines where they belonged. When she finished, the shirt was immaculate. Ming nodded slowly. "Strong hands, good for wringing. Long arms, good for hanging. You're not afraid of hot water, long hours?" "No, ma'am." "Then come tomorrow, 7 o'clock. $1.50 a day, 6 days a week. You make trouble, you go. You work hard, you stay." Outside, Clara felt lightheaded with relief. They hired me. Chens are practical people, Jonah said. They care about results, not appearances. They visited the mercantile next. Samuel Hart, a widower running the store alone, looked harried among his stock. His eyes widened at Clara's height, but when she offered to help him reorganize his highest shelves, reaching places he needed a ladder, for his hesitation melted into gratitude. Could use help 2 afternoons a week, he said. Stock's getting away from me since my son joined the cavalry. By noon, Clara had secured enough work to support herself. The telegraph office had turned her away, the operator claiming women's minds weren't suited for such technical work, but she had income purpose a chance. Standing outside the mercantile, she turned to Jonah. I should find lodging now, on my own. Mrs. Winters won't have changed her mind overnight. Then I'll find somewhere else. I've imposed enough on your kindness. Jonah studied her with those storm-gray eyes. There's a room above Chen's laundry. They've been looking to rent it. Might suit you being close to work. Clara felt a smile, the first real one since arriving. Practical and kind. You're an unusual man, Mr. Rourke. Jonah. And I'm not kind, just sensible. Town needs good workers more than it needs to maintain its prejudices. They parted at the laundry, Clara, to inquire about the room Jonah to whatever business had brought him to town. But he paused at the corner. If you need anything, if anyone gives you trouble, my cabin's a mile north on the forest road. Just follow the blazes on the trees. Then he was gone, leaving Clara standing in the muddy street of a town that had rejected her, holding the possibility of a different life. The room above the laundry was small but clean, with a window overlooking the main street. Ming showed her the space, explaining the rent, the rules, the expectations. As they descended the narrow stairs, Clara heard voices from the shop below. That mannish creature Gentry was fool enough to send for saw her walking with Rourke, bold as brass. No decent woman would be so tall, so... Ming's face darkened. She swept into the shop where 3 women clustered at the counter, their laundry bundled before them. You want gossip, go to saloon, Ming announced. You want clean clothes, keep quiet. Miss Clara work here now. You not like wash clothes yourself. The women sputtered, but Ming stood firm, all 4 feet 11 inches of her radiating authority. They collected their bundles and fled, whispers trailing behind them. They talk, Ming said to Clara. They always talk. About Chinese, about anyone different. But clean clothes matter more than talk. You work good, they need you, they stop talking. She paused. Or they wash own clothes. Either way, we win. That night, Clara sat in her small room, counting her possibilities. Enough work to live on. A roof overhead. Employers who valued function over form. It wasn't what she'd imagined when she'd answered Patrick's advertisement, but it was hers earned without diminishing herself. Through her window, she watched Fox Hollow settle into evening. Somewhere out there, people whispered about the unnatural woman who'd come to town. But also out there were the Chens, who judged by skill. Samuel Hart, who needed help more than he needed conformity. And Jonah Rourke, who'd offered shelter without payment or judgment. Clara unpinned her hair, letting it fall free. Tomorrow she'd pin it up again, face the whispers work until her hands ached. She'd be too tall, too strong, too much for Fox Hollow's comfort. But for tonight in her own room, earned by her own labor, she was exactly enough. The weeks passed in a rhythm of soap and steam. Clara's hands grew red from the lie, her back ached from bending over washboards, but she'd found a place in Fox Hollow's reluctant margins. The Chens treated her fairly, the work was steady, and if the townspeople still whispered, at least they brought their dirty linens. Then came the night that changed everything. Clara had worked late, helping Ming prepare a large order for the boarding house, the same establishment that had refused her a room. The irony wasn't lost on either woman as they folded sheets that would grace beds deemed too good for Clara to sleep in. The streets were dark when she finally climbed to her room, only a few windows glowing against the October cold. She'd just lit her lamp when she heard it, rough voices, the crash of breaking glass, a woman's cry. From her window, Clara saw 3 men surrounding Ming in the alley behind the laundry. Thomas lay crumpled against the wall, blood dark on his face. One man held Ming's arms while another rifled through the cash box they'd dragged from the shop. Clara didn't think. She flew down the stairs, grabbing the heavy pressing iron still warm from the day's work. But as she burst into the alley, someone else emerged from the shadows. Jonah Rourke moved like an avalanche, swift, brutal, inevitable. The man holding Ming went down first Jonah's fist, connecting with his jaw. The second man pulled a knife, but Jonah caught his wrist twisting until the blade clattered away. The third tried to run but made it only 2 steps before Jonah hauled him back. It was over in moments. 2 men groaned on the ground. The third scrambled away into the night. Jonah knelt beside Thomas, checking his wounds while Clara helped Ming to her feet. "The sheriff," Ming gasped. "Someone get—" "Sheriff's in Laramie till Tuesday," Jonah said grimly. "These boys knew that, planned it." Clara recognized one of the groaning men, Walt Stevens, who worked at the lumber mill. He'd been one of the loudest voices against the Chens, opening their business, claiming they were stealing work from real Americans. "We need to get Thomas inside," Clara said. "I can tend his wounds." Together, they carried Thomas into the laundry. Clara's mill training included basic medical knowledge. Factories didn't stop for minor injuries. She cleaned the gash on his temple, checked for broken bones, while Ming hovered nearby, and Jonah stood guard. "Not too deep," Clara announced. "He'll have a fierce headache, but no lasting damage." Thomas stirred, focusing slowly on the faces around him. "The money?" "Safe." Jonah held up the recovered cash box. "Though these fools were too stupid to realize most of your earnings go straight to the bank in Cheyenne." "Why were you here?" Clara asked Jonah quietly while Ming tended her husband. Was passing by, heard the commotion. He studied her, taking in the pressing iron she still clutched. "You were going to take on 3 men with that." "They were hurting my employers, my friends." Something shifted in Jonah's expression. "That iron wouldn't have done much good." "Then it's fortunate you arrived." "No, fortunate would have been preventing this altogether." He moved to the door, scanning the street. "This won't be the end. Stevens and his friends think the Chens don't belong here, think anyone different doesn't belong." Clara thought of her own first night, the rejections, the cold. "What can we do?" "For tonight I'll stay. Make sure they don't come back. Tomorrow we organize. There are good people in Fox Hollow, they just need reminding that staying silent makes them complicit." "We cannot ask." Thomas tried to sit up, wincing. "You're not asking. I'm offering." Jonah settled into a chair by the door, rifle across his knees. "Clara, you should get some rest. Tomorrow will be long." But Clara shook her head. "I'll make coffee. If we're standing guard, we do it together." Through the night they kept watch. Ming dozed beside Thomas, who slept fitfully. Clara and Jonah sat in companionable silence, broken by occasional quiet conversation. "You were ready to fight for them," Jonah observed, "even knowing what this town thinks of you. They gave me work when no one else would. Treated me as a person, not a curiosity." Clara refilled his coffee cup. "That earns loyalty. And if the town turns on you, decides harboring Chinese makes you as unwelcome as them." Clara's smile was sharp. "Then I'll know exactly where I stand. I've been unwelcome before. At least this time it would be for something worthwhile." Dawn came slowly, painting Fox Hollow in shades of gray and gold. True to Jonah's prediction, it brought complications. Word of the attack spread quickly, dividing the town. Some muttered that the Chens had brought it on themselves, should have known better than to set up shop where they weren't wanted. Others surprisingly expressed outrage. Samuel Hart was first to arrive, bringing bandages and his army medical kit from his cavalry days. "Heard what happened. Damn shameful. What do you need?" The minister, Reverend Mills, followed. Then Mrs. Peterson from the bakery, her arms full of fresh bread. Even some who'd whispered about Clara nodded respectfully as she answered the door, recognizing her vigil. By noon, a small crowd had gathered. Not all of Fox Hollow, but enough. Jonah stood on the laundry's front step, his presence commanding attention. "The sheriff returns Tuesday. Till then we protect our own, all our own." His gaze swept the crowd. "The Chens work hard, pay taxes, contribute to this town. Anyone has a problem with that, they can take it up with me." And me, Samuel Hart stepped forward. Me as well, added Reverend Mills. One by one, others joined them. Not everyone prejudice ran too deep for a single night to change all minds, but enough to form a protective network, taking turns watching the laundry, walking the Chens to and from the bank. That evening, as Clara prepared to take her shift guarding the shop, Jonah caught her arm. You could have stayed in your room last night, stayed safe. I've been safe my whole life, safe and alone. She met his eyes. I'd rather stand for something, even if that something makes you more of an outsider. I'm already an outsider. At least now I'm an outsider with purpose. Jonah released her arm slowly. Would you? That is when your shift ends. Would you join me for supper? The hotel dining room serves a decent steak, and I'd like to know more about a woman who'd charge into an alley with nothing but a pressing iron and courage. Clara felt heat rise in her cheeks. In Philadelphia, no man had ever asked her to dine. Too tall, too strong, too much. But Jonah looked at her like she was exactly right. I finish at 8. I'll wait. The dining room fell silent when they entered together. Clara, in her best dress, still plain by Fox Hollow standards, and Jonah clean-shaven and wearing a shirt without patches. They made an imposing pair, both tall, both strong, both unconcerned with the stares. Let them look, Jonah murmured, pulling out her chair. Maybe they'll learn something. Over steak and potatoes they talked, not about the attack or the town's prejudices, but about themselves. Clara learned that Jonah had been a cavalry scout before seeking solitude in the mountains, that he carved toys for the missionary school's children, that he'd learned healing from a Cheyenne medicine woman who'd saved his life after a bear attack. The scars. Clara had noticed marks on his hands. Bear thought I looked like dinner. Changed its mind when I fought back. His smile was rueful. Been living mostly alone since. Easier than dealing with people who think knowing one thing about you means knowing everything. And yet you came to town tonight, fought for the Chens. Sometimes being alone isn't the same as being uninvolved. He studied her across the table. You understand that. Could have taken that train back east, but you stayed. Why? Clara considered her words. Because going back meant accepting their definition of me. Here at least I can define myself. And how do you define Clara Hollins? Still figuring that out, but I know she's not too much. She's just enough. Jonah raised his water glass. To being enough. They walked back through streets gone quiet past the laundry where Samuel Hart had taken the watch. At the stairs to Clara's room, Jonah paused. Thank you for dinner, Clara said, for seeing me as more than my height. Height's just the first thing people notice. What matters is what comes after. He touched his hat brim. Good night, Clara. Alone in her room, Clara unpinned her hair and thought about definitions. The town had tried to define her as unnatural, too much unwelcome. She'd started defining herself through work, loyalty, courage. But tonight, sitting across from Jonah Rourke, she'd felt something new, the possibility of being defined not by what she wasn't, but by who she was becoming. Outside, Fox Hollow slept uneasily, still divided, but no longer quite the same. And in a small room above a laundry, a woman who'd been too much all her life finally began to believe she might be exactly enough. The November wind rattled Clara's window, bringing with it the promise of early snow. She'd been in Fox Hollow nearly 2 months now, her hands rough from her place in the town's fabric, still uncertain, but somehow steadier. The attack on the Chens had shifted something, not acceptance exactly, but a grudging acknowledgement that Clara Hollins would stand her ground. Tonight, exhaustion pulled at her bones. A traveling theater troupe had passed through, leaving what seemed like half their costumes for cleaning and mending. She'd worked since dawn, steam curling her escaped hair fingers, cramping from detailed stitchwork. The knock came just as she prepared for bed, 3 sharp raps that spoke of urgency. Clara wrapped her shawl around her shoulders and descended the stairs, lamp in hand. Jonah stood in the doorway, snow already dusting his shoulders, though the storm had barely begun. But it was the child in his arms that made Clara gasp, a boy of perhaps 6 years, burning with fever, wrapped in Jonah's buffalo coat. Found him in the woods. Jonah's voice was tight with worry. "His family's wagon broke an axle 2 days ago. Parents are dead, fever took them. Boy was trying to walk to town." Clara didn't hesitate. "Bring him upstairs. Ming has clean blankets in the storage room. I'll fetch them." They worked without words, years of handling emergencies guiding their movements. Clara prepared a pallet near her small stove while Jonah gently removed the child's wet clothes, wrapping him in warmed blankets. The boy muttered deliriously, calling for his mother in broken syllables that tore at Clara's heart. "We need a doctor," Clara said, though she knew the answer. "Doc Morrison's drunk by now. Won't be sober till morning if then." Jonah's jaw tightened. "And even sober, he charges more than most can afford." Clara thought of Patrick Gentry, the doctor who'd promised to marry her, who'd fled rather than face her. He would have known what to do. But he'd chosen cowardice over duty, leaving Fox Hollow with one doctor who preferred whiskey to patience. "Then we do what we can." Clara had seen fever cases in Philadelphia where illness spread through cramped tenements like wildfire. Cool cloths for the fever. Willow bark tea if he can swallow. Keep him warm but not smothered. Through the night they tended the boy. Clara bathed his burning skin with cool water while Jonah coaxed drops of tea between cracked lips. The child, they learned his name, was Timothy. From his fevered rambling, fought against unseen demons, crying out for parents who would never answer. "Shouldn't have happened," Jonah said during one of Timothy's quieter moments. "Family trying to reach Oregon before winter. Probably spent everything they had on supplies, couldn't afford a guide." He smoothed the boy's hair with surprising gentleness. "Found their wagon 2 miles out. Looked like they'd been sick for days before the cold finished them." "You buried them?" "Best I could in frozen ground. Marked the spot for spring." His voice roughened. "Boy was curled up between them, nearly frozen himself." Another hour. Clara covered Jonah's hand with her own. "But you found him. He's here now." "For all the good it does. No family in town, no orphanage closer than Cheyenne. If he survives." "When he survives," Clara corrected firmly. "We'll face what comes next." The night stretched endlessly. Timothy's fever climbed, peaked, held at dangerous heights. Clara found herself praying not the formal words of Sunday service, but the desperate pleas of someone fighting for a child's life. Jonah matched her dedication, his large hands impossibly gentle as he adjusted blankets, offered water, simply held the boy when nightmares shook his small frame. "You're good with him," Clara observed during a brief respite. "Had younger brothers once, long time ago." The words came reluctantly. "Diphtheria took them while I was away with the cavalry. Came home to 3 graves and parents who never smiled again." Clara understood then why this mountain-rough man lived alone, why he'd appeared with such urgency carrying a dying child. Some guilts carved themselves into bone-shaped every choice after. "It wasn't your fault." "No, but knowing that doesn't bring them back." He checked Timothy's forehead, frowning at the persistent heat. "Nothing brings them back." Near dawn, Clara dozed in her chair, startled awake by silence. The harsh breathing that had filled the room had quieted. For one terrible moment she thought, but no. Timothy lay still, his chest rising and falling evenly. The fever had broken. "Thank God," she breathed. Jonah slumped in his chair, exhaustion etching deep lines in his face. He made it through the worst. Still weak, still needs care, but he'll live." Clara felt tears threaten, pushed them back. "We should rest, both of us. I'll ask Ming to watch him for a few hours." But Jonah shook his head. "You sleep, I'll stay. You've been awake as long as I have." "I'm used to it. Besides," he gestured to the small room, "wouldn't be proper me sleeping in your quarters." Clara almost laughed. After the night they'd shared, not romantically but in purpose and determination, propriety seemed absurd. But she recognized the protection he offered. Town gossip had been quiet lately, but finding Jonah Rourke in her rooms come morning would resurrect every whisper. "Then I'll make coffee and breakfast. We both need strength for what's coming." As she worked in the small corner that served as her kitchen, Clara watched Jonah with Timothy. He'd pulled his chair close to the pallet, one hand resting on the boy's forehead, monitoring the temperature. His rough features had softened, showing glimpses of the man he might have been if loss hadn't driven him to solitude. "What will happen to him?" Clara asked, handing Jonah coffee and cornbread. "Depends. Sheriff might know of relatives back east. If not." Jonah's expression darkened. "Orphanage, most likely. Or some family looking for free labor on their farm." "He deserves better." "Most orphans do. World doesn't much care what children deserve." They sat quietly, watching Timothy sleep. The storm had passed, leaving Fox Hollow wrapped in pristine white that would soon enough turn to muddy slush. Clara thought about the boy's parents buried in frozen ground, their last act protecting their child even as fever took them. "I could keep him," the words escaped before she'd fully formed the thought. Jonah looked up sharply. "Clara, I have room, work enough to support us both. He needs someone, and I—" She paused, understanding her own heart. "I've been alone too long." "Town barely accepts you as is. Single woman raising a child she's not related to. They'll talk." "Let them. Their talk doesn't warm him, doesn't feed him, doesn't hold him when nightmares come." "It's not that simple. There are laws, procedures. Sheriff will want to do things proper." Clara's chin lifted that familiar gesture of defiance. "Then I'll do whatever's needed. Fill out papers, talk to judges, prove I'm fit. I've fought for less important things." Jonah studied her. This woman who'd charged into an alley to defend her employers, who'd spent a night battling death for a child she'd never met. Something shifted in his expression, decision made. "You won't do it alone. Boy needs a mother, true, but he needs more than that. Needs stability, protection, someone to teach him to hunt and ride and defend himself." He took a deep breath. "I've lived alone long enough. Maybe it's time I remembered why I came back from the mountains in the first place." Clara's heart stuttered. "Jonah, what are you saying?" "I'm saying that boy deserves a family, real one, and maybe—" He reached across the space between them, took her hand carefully as if she might break despite her obvious strength. "Maybe we both deserve to stop being alone." The words hung between them, momentous and fragile. Clara had come to Fox Hollow for a marriage that proved false. Now, in her small room above a laundry, beside a child who'd lost everything, a different possibility emerged. Not romance, as the novels painted it sudden and swooning, but partnership born of shared purpose, mutual respect, and the gradual recognition that two solitary souls might build something stronger together. The town. "We'll talk regardless. At least this gives them something worth discussing." "We barely know." "I know you stand when others sit, fight when others flee, work when others gossip." His thumb brushed her knuckles, calluses against calluses. "Know you see me as a man, not a hermit or a savage. That's more than most marriages start with." Timothy stirred, whimpering. Without releasing Clara's hand, Jonah reached over to soothe the boy, his touch sure and gentle. Clara watched them, this unlikely pair, who'd entered her life on a snowy night, and felt something settle in her chest. Not love, not yet, but the foundation for it built on shared vigils and common purpose. "Yes," she said simply. Jonah's smile transformed his weathered face. "We'll do it proper. Talk to Reverend Mills' file papers for Timothy, face down anyone who objects." He squeezed her hand once more, then released it. "But first we get this boy well. Everything else can wait." As morning light filled the room, Clara allowed herself to imagine it a life where too much became exactly enough, where a lonely hunter and a rejected spinster created family from loss, purpose from pain. Outside, Fox Hollow was waking to its prejudices and petty concerns. But inside this small room, three souls had found each other in the storm. It wasn't the life Clara had planned when she'd stepped off that train. It was something rarer, harder won, more precious, a chance to build, rather than seek to stand firm, rather than fit in to be fully herself while helping others do the same. Timothy's fever had broken. The storm had passed, and in the quiet morning light a different future took shape, one measured not in conventional expectations, but in the courage to forge new definitions of family, belonging, and home. The snow deepened over Fox Hollow as December arrived, transforming the muddy streets into corridors of white. Clara had moved into Jonah's cabin the week after Reverend Mills performed their simple ceremony, a practical union witnessed by the Chens and Samuel Hart, with Timothy standing between them, still weak but determined to be part of the moment that made him theirs. The cabin felt different with 3 souls inhabiting it. Clara's presence showed in small ways: curtain sheets sewn from fabric scraps, herbs drying by the window, books borrowed from the minister's wife, lined on a new shelf. Timothy's corner held the bed Jonah had built, surrounded by the boy's few treasures: a carved wooden horse, his mother's handkerchief, smooth stones collected on their walks. Their days fell into rhythm. Mornings, Clara rose first, stoking the fire and preparing breakfast, while Jonah tended the animals: 2 horses, chickens, a milk cow he'd acquired shortly after their marriage. Timothy helped with simple chores, gaining strength daily, though nightmares still woke him, calling for parents who couldn't answer. "He was crying again last night," Clara said one evening, kneading bread for the next day. Snow fell steadily outside, sealing them in warm isolation. Jonah looked up from the trap he was repairing. "Heard him. You went to him quickly." "Not quickly enough." She punched the dough harder than necessary. "He asks about them, wants to know if they're cold, buried in the ground." "What do you tell him?" "That they're together watching over him. That they loved him enough to protect him even when sick themselves." Clara's hand stilled. "I don't know if it helps." Jonah set aside his work, moving to stand beside her at the rough table. His hands, so large next to hers, took over the kneading with practiced motions. "My mother used to say grief was like winter, necessary but not permanent. Spring comes eventually, even if we can't imagine it during the darkest cold." "Your mother sounds wise." "She was. Would have liked you a woman who doesn't need rescuing, just partnering." Clara smiled at that. Their marriage was exactly that, a partnership. They shared work decisions, the gradual building of trust. At night, Jonah still maintained careful distance, spreading his bedroll by the fire while she took the bed. But sometimes she caught him watching her with something deeper than respect, and her own heart answered with unexpected warmth. Papa Jonah Timothy appeared from his corner, the name they'd agreed on still new on his tongue. "Will you show me the stars again?" Despite the falling snow, Jonah bundled the boy in furs and carried him to the doorway. Together they studied the patches of sky visible between clouds, Jonah pointing out constellations and telling stories his Cheyenne friends had shared. Clara joined them, her shawl inadequate against the cold, until Jonah shifted, creating a windbreak with his body. "There," he pointed, "the Great Bear. Some say he guards children who've lost their way, guides them home." Timothy pressed closer to Jonah's chest. "Did he guide me to you and Mama Clara?" "Maybe so, son, maybe so." Later, after Timothy slept, Clara found herself reluctant to retreat to the bed. The fire crackled invitingly, and Jonah had made tea from the herbs she'd dried, chamomile and mint, soothing after the long day. "He's beginning to call this home," she observed, settling into the chair across from Jonah's. "And you, does this feel like home?" Clara considered. The cabin was rough, isolated, nothing like the life she'd imagined. But there was peace here, purpose, the gradual weaving of 3 damaged souls into something whole. "More each day, though I wonder sometimes." "What?" "If I'm doing right by you, by this arrangement. You married me to help Timothy, to provide propriety. But you're young, still strong. You could have courted someone proper, someone who knew how to be a true wife." Jonah's gaze sharpened. "You think I married you just for the boy?" "Didn't you?" He stood abruptly, pacing to the window. "That morning when we fought to save him, I watched you, saw you refuse to give up, saw you gentle despite your strength. I've lived alone so long I'd forgotten what it felt like to work beside someone, to share purpose." He turned back. "I didn't marry you for propriety, Clara. I married you because I finally met someone who made solitude feel like loneliness." Clara's breath caught. "Jonah!" "I know we agreed to a practical arrangement. Know you came here for another man, another life, but I'm not Patrick Gentry. I don't want you smaller or quieter or different. I want—" He stopped, struggling with words. "I want to earn the right to hold you, not because it's cold or proper, but because you want me to." The only sound was wind against walls, and Timothy's soft breathing. Clara rose crossed to where Jonah stood. She had to tilt her head only slightly to meet his eyes, another tall soul in a world that preferred people compact. "That first night when you offered me shelter without condition, I thought you were either saint or fool." She raised her hand to his cheek, feeling the rasp of stubble. "Now I know you're neither. Just a good man who sees people for who they are, not who the world says they should be." "Clara." Her name was a question, a hope. "The bed's warmer than the floor," she said simply. "And I'm tired of both of us pretending we prefer distance." His kiss was careful, as if she might startle. But Clara had never been fragile, despite what the world assumed. She met him fully honestly, two people choosing each other not from desperation, but recognition. When they parted, Jonah rested his forehead against hers. "You sure?" "I've been sure since you wrapped Timothy in your own coat, since you stood guard at the Chens, since you saw me at my worst and offered your best." She smiled. "The question is, are you sure I'm still too tall, too strong, too—" He silenced her with another kiss, deeper this time. "You're exactly right. Always have been. Just took Fox Hollow a while to notice." That night, for the first time, they shared the bed not in passion, but in companionship, learning the comfortable way two bodies could occupy space without losing themselves. Clara discovered that Jonah ran warm as a furnace, that he muttered in his sleep about ordinary things. He learned that she curled into herself like a cat, that she reached out unconsciously to check Timothy's breathing even from across the room. Morning brought Timothy padding over to find them together, his small face brightening. "Are you keeping each other warm? That's good. Mama used to say Papa was better than any blanket." Clara felt Jonah's silent laughter against her back. "Your mama was a smart woman, and yes, we're keeping each other warm." "Good." Timothy climbed carefully onto the bed, settling between them with the trust of a child who'd learned that some endings led to better beginnings. "Can we stay like this today? Just be warm and together?" "Chores won't do themselves," Jonah said, but his arm came around both Clara and Timothy, holding them close. "Let them wait," Clara decided, surprising herself. All her life she'd been driven by work, by proving her worth through labor. But here in this simple cabin with these two souls who'd chosen her, she found value in stillness. They dozed as snow continued falling, sealing out a world that might judge their unconventional family. Inside, wrapped in quilts and each other, they were complete. Not perfect perfection was for fairy tales, but real, grounded in choice and daily kindness, in the courage to build something new from loss. Later there would be work wood to chop animals, to tend bread, to bake Timothy's lessons, to oversee. The town would talk as towns always did. Challenges would come with spring, with growth, with the business of living. But for now, in the quiet morning with snow muffling all sound, three people who'd been too much or too little for the world were exactly enough for each other. And that, Clara thought as she felt Jonah's breathing deepen and Timothy's small hand curl into hers, was its own kind of miracle. Not the dramatic kind promised in romance novels or revival tents, but the everyday wonder of finding home in unexpected places with unexpected people in ways the heart recognized even when the world did not. The thaw came early that year, turning roads to muddy rivers and bringing unexpected visitors to the cabin. Clara was teaching Timothy his letters when she heard the horses too many for ordinary travelers. Through the window, she saw 4 riders approaching their clothes, speaking of money and Eastern manners. "Jonah," she called quietly. He emerged from the barn, rifle casual in his hands, reading the situation instantly. The lead rider dismounted with practiced ease. He was perhaps 40, well-fed and well-dressed, with eyes that swept their humble home with barely concealed disdain. "I'm looking for the boy," he announced without preamble. "Timothy Watson. I'm Edwin Palmer, the child's uncle from Boston. His father was my wife's brother." Clara felt Timothy press against her skirts, trembling. She placed a protective hand on his shoulder while Jonah moved closer, creating a wall between the child and these strangers. "Wasn't aware the boy had living relatives," Jonah said evenly. "Sheriff made inquiries. Found nothing." Palmer's smile was cold. "Western sheriffs aren't known for thoroughness. When word finally reached us of my brother-in-law's unfortunate demise, I came immediately." His gaze found Timothy. Come here, boy. Timothy shrank further behind Clara. I don't know you, he whispered. Of course not. You were barely walking when your parents made their foolish decision to head west. Palmer's tone suggested this tragedy was entirely predictable. No matter, you'll come to know your proper family soon enough. The boy has family, Clara stated, her voice carrying the steel she'd learned in Philadelphia mills. He has a home. Palmer's eyebrows rose as he took in Clara, her height, her work-worn hands, her protective stance. And you are Clara Rourke, the boy's mother now. This is my husband, Jonah. His mother? Palmer's laugh was ugly. My dear woman, you're nothing to the child. Some frontier arrangement born of necessity, no doubt, but hardly legal guardianship. We filed papers, Jonah interjected. Judge in Cheyenne approved them. Boys ours legal and proper. Palmer waved dismissively. Frontier judges. I have lawyers in Boston who'll make short work of such informal arrangements. He studied them with the calculating gaze of a man used to getting his way. I'll make this simple. The boy comes with me now peacefully, and I won't pursue damages for your illegal custody. No, Timothy burst out, clinging to Clara with desperate strength. I won't go. Mama Clara, don't let him take me. Clara knelt, gathering the boy close. Over his head she met Palmer's cold gaze. You hear him? He doesn't want to go. Children rarely know what's best for them. That's why they need proper guidance. Palmer signaled to his men. Thomas, prepare the spare horse. We've wasted enough time. Jonah stepped forward, rifle still casual, but message clear. Boy's not going anywhere he doesn't want to. Palmer's face flushed. You dare threaten me? I could buy and sell this entire miserable territory. That child is my blood, my responsibility. Where was your responsibility when his parents lay dying? Clara rose. Timothy still clutched against her. Where was this family concern when a 6-year-old boy nearly froze trying to reach help? You didn't want him then. You want him now because... Why? Because duty demands it. Because proper Boston society expects it. Palmer's mask slipped, showing the calculation beneath. The boy's father had investments, property back east. As his nearest male relative, I have a duty to oversee the child's inheritance. There it was, the truth beneath the family concern. Clara felt sick. This man didn't want Timothy. He wanted what Timothy represented. Get off our land, Jonah said quietly. Now. I'll return with the sheriff. With proper warrants. Palmer remounted, looking down at them with contempt. Enjoy your little family while you can. Boston lawyers eat frontier paperwork for breakfast. After they left, Clara found herself shaking not with fear, but rage. Timothy wept against her shoulder, great gulping sobs that tore at her heart. They can't take him, she said to Jonah. Can they? Jonah's face was grim. Money talks loud in courtrooms, and Palmer's right Eastern lawyers know tricks we've never dreamed of. That night, after Timothy finally slept, they sat by the fire planning. Running would make them look guilty. Fighting in court required money they didn't have. But Fox Hollow had taught Clara something about community, about people standing together. We need help, she decided, and I know where to start. The next morning found them in town, Timothy between them facing a gathering at the church. Word had spread, it always did in Fox Hollow, and opinions were divided. Some thought blood family should prevail. Others remembered the night Jonah had brought in a dying child. Clara stood before them, Timothy's hand in hers. Most of you didn't want me here. I was too tall, too strange, too much. But the Chens gave me work. Samuel Hart gave me a chance. Jonah gave me shelter. This town, despite itself, gave me a home. She paused, meeting eyes that had once dismissed her. Now someone wants to take our son. Not because they love him, but because he's worth money to them. They think frontier people don't matter, that our families aren't real because they're chosen instead of born. Ming Chen stood first. When men attacked us, Clara fought for us. We fight for her now. Samuel Hart joined her. The boy's been nothing but polite in my store. Helps carry packages for elderly ladies. That's Clara and Jonah's teaching. One by one, others stood. Even Mrs. Winters, who'd refused Clara shelter that first night, rose slowly. I was wrong, she said simply, about a lot of things. Reverend Mills cleared his throat. Mr. Palmer will need to present his case to Judge Harrison in Cheyenne. Harrison's a fair man, but he respects community testimony. If Fox Hollow stands together, speaks together. Then we go to Cheyenne, Jonah said. All of us who can. Show the judge that Timothy has more than guardians, he has a whole town as family. The impromptu meeting became planning. Who could spare time for travel, who would mind shops and animals, how to present their case. Clara watched in wonder as the town that had rejected her rallied to protect her son. But that evening brought bad news. Sheriff Coleman arrived at the cabin, hat in hand, face apologetic. Palmer's got an injunction, he said heavily. Says the boy has to stay in town under supervision till the hearing. Claims you might run. Supervision where? Jonah's voice was dangerous. I'm Mrs. Winter's boarding house. She's agreed to keep him. The sheriff looked miserable. I'm sorry, folks. I'd rather eat my badge than do this, but... The law's the law, Clara finished. Her mind raced. Can we visit? Daily, but he sleeps there till Judge Harrison decides. Timothy, who'd been listening from his corner, ran to Clara. No, I won't go. You promised we were family. Clara knelt, framing his face with her hands. We are family. Nothing changes that. This is just for a little while, like when you stay with Mrs. Chen when we go to market. You'll be brave and we'll visit every day, and soon the judge will say you can come home. Promise. She thought of all the promises broken in her life. Her mother's promise that someone would love her despite her height. Patrick's promise of marriage, the world's promise that hard work guaranteed respect. But looking into Timothy's terrified eyes, she made another. I promise we'll fight for you with everything we have. Mrs. Winters arrived to collect Timothy, her face softer than Clara had ever seen it. I'll take good care of him, she said quietly. I know what I said before about you. I was wrong. The boy belongs with you. Watching Timothy walk away, small hand in Mrs. Winters's, nearly broke Clara. Jonah's arm came around her solid and sure. We'll get him back, he murmured. Palmer thinks money wins everything, but he's never faced Fox Hollow when it decides to protect its own. That night, in their too-quiet cabin, Clara lay wakeful despite Jonah's comforting presence. Somewhere in town, Timothy was learning what she'd always known, that belonging was fragile. That family could be torn apart by those who defined it narrowly. But he was also learning what she'd discovered, that sometimes strangers became family, that communities could change, that fighting for love was worth any battle. Tomorrow would bring lawyers and arguments, procedures and prejudices. But tonight, Clara Rourke, too tall, too strong, too much, was exactly the mother Timothy needed. And with a town behind them and a husband beside her, she would prove it to anyone who dared suggest otherwise. The week Timothy spent at Mrs. Winter's boarding house stretched like an eternity. Each morning, Clara and Jonah visited, bringing fresh clothes and Timothy's lesson. The boy put on a brave face, but Clara saw the shadows under his eyes, the way he clung to them until Mrs. Winters gently reminded them of the court's restrictions. It was during one of these visits that Clara noticed Timothy's cough, soft, at first easily dismissed. But her years in the mills had taught her to recognize the early signs of lung ailment. Has he been sleeping well? She asked Mrs. Winters. Restless. Calls out at night. The older woman's face creased with concern. I've been giving him warm milk, but... Clara felt Jonah tense beside her. They both knew what prairie winters could do to weaken children, how quickly a small cough could turn dangerous. We need to take him home, Clara said. Just until he's well. Mrs. Winters shook her head sadly. Mr. Palmer has made it clear any deviation from the judge's orders, and he'll claim you're unfit. He's staying at the hotel watching everything. That evening in their cabin, Clara paced while Jonah cleaned his rifle with methodical precision. He's getting sick, Clara said. I can hear it in his breathing. And that man sits in his comfortable hotel room planning to drag our boy to Boston away from everything he knows. Maybe that's what we need, Jonah said quietly. Clara stopped pacing. What? Palmer thinks we're simple frontier folk. Thinks we'll just follow the rules, wait for the hearing. Jonah set down his rifle. But I've tracked through Cheyenne territory in winter. Know every trail, every shelter. If we took Timothy and headed north. Run. Clara sank into her chair. That would prove Palmer right that we're unfit, that we'd steal a child. Rather be a thief with Timothy safe than law-abiding without him. Clara understood the temptation. Part of her wanted to gather Timothy and disappear into the vast wilderness Jonah knew so well. But another part, the part forged in Philadelphia's harsh realities, knew better. No, we run, we lose everything. The home we've built, the community that's supporting us. And Timothy loses too: stability, education, a future beyond hiding. Jonah's jaw worked. Then what? We fight smarter. Clara moved to their small shelf of books, pulling out the leather journal where she kept important papers. Palmer said Timothy's father had investments. Property. That means there should be records, wills, documents. How does that help us? Because if Timothy's parents made a will, they might have specified guardians, or at least their wishes for his care. Clara's mind raced. Palmer assumed he was the only family, but what if there are others? What if Timothy's parents explicitly didn't want Palmer raising their son? It was a slim hope, but hope nonetheless. The next morning, while visiting Timothy, whose cough had worsened overnight, Clara casually asked about his extended family. Papa didn't like Uncle Edwin, Timothy said between coughs. Said he was... The boy paused, remembering he shouldn't repeat everything adults said. It's all right, Clara encouraged. What did your papa say? That Uncle Edwin loved money more than people. That's why we went west, to be away from grasping relations. Timothy curled against Clara's side. Papa said the frontier made people honest. Either they helped each other or they didn't survive. That afternoon, Clara visited the telegraph office. The operator, Mr. Daniels, had initially refused her employment, but months of reliable service from her had softened his stance. I need to send a message to Boston, she said. To the courthouse. Request for records regarding James and Mary Watson's estate. Daniels looked uncomfortable. Mrs. Rourke, Mr. Palmer has made it known that anyone helping you might face complications. And what complications did Mr. Palmer face when he let a child's parents die unmourned, when he ignored Timothy's existence until money was involved? Clara placed coins on the counter. Send the message, Mr. Daniels, or explain to your wife why you chose a Boston man's threats over a Fox Hollow child's welfare. The message went out. While waiting for a response, Clara and Jonah organized their supporters. The Chens would testify about Clara's character. Samuel Hart would speak to their financial stability. Reverend Mills would address their moral standing. Even Doc Morrison sober for once agreed to testify about the night they'd saved Timothy's life. But it was Mrs. Winters who provided unexpected ammunition. That Palmer fellow, she said during one visit, while Timothy dozed fitfully against Clara's shoulder. Keeps asking about the boy's things, particularly interested in any papers or letters his parents might have had. Clara's pulse quickened. Timothy's belongings are at our cabin. I know. Told Palmer the boy arrived with nothing but the clothes on his back. But he keeps pressing. Mrs. Winters lowered her voice. Made me wonder what he's really looking for. That night, Clara and Jonah carefully examined Timothy's few possessions. In the lining of his mother's traveling case, stitched with tiny, careful stitches, they found it a letter. Asterisk. If something happens to us, asterisk, Mary Watson had written, in failing hand. Asterisk. Let this be known. We want our son raised with values of hard work and honest living, not the greed and false propriety of Boston society. My brother Edwin Palmer is not to have custody. We've seen how he treats his own children as possessions, not people. Find someone who will love Timothy for himself, not his potential inheritance. She knew, Clara breathed. She knew she was dying, and she tried to protect him. Jonah's face was grim with satisfaction. Palmer won't be expecting this. The telegraph response from Boston arrived 2 days later, confirming what the letter suggested. James Watson had indeed updated his will before leaving, specifically excluding Edwin Palmer from any role in Timothy's upbringing. The estate would be held in trust for Timothy until adulthood, managed by Boston's First National Bank, not relatives. Armed with this information, they prepared for the hearing. But Timothy's health deteriorated rapidly. The cough deepened, fever came and went. Doc Morrison prescribed medicines but shook his head privately. Boy needs home care, he told Clara. Familiar surroundings, constant attention. This stress is wearing him down. Clara spent every allowed moment at the boarding house telling Timothy stories, coaxing broth between his lips, fighting despair as his small body battled illness. Mrs. Winters relaxed the visitation rules, understanding what Morrison had said the child needed his mother. It was during one of these vigils that Palmer made his mistake. He arrived at the boarding house pushing past Mrs. Winters, demanding to see his nephew. Timothy, delirious with fever, recoiled from the strange man. "No, Mama Clara, Papa Jonah." Palmer grabbed the boy's arm. "You'll learn proper address in Boston. None of this frontier nonsense." The slap caught everyone by surprise, not least Clara herself. But seeing Palmer's hands on her sick child had triggered something primal. The sound echoed through the boarding house. "You touch him again," Clara said, voice deadly quiet, "and I'll show you what frontier women do to men who hurt children." Palmer's face flushed purple. "You struck me witnesses, all of you, this violent woman." "I saw a concerned mother protecting a sick child from rough handling," Mrs. Winters interrupted. "As would any of us." The other boarders nodded agreement. Palmer stormed out, threats trailing behind him, but Clara had seen something in his eyes, uncertainty. He'd expected cowed frontier folk. Instead, he'd found a community willing to fight. That night, Jonah held Clara as she finally let tears fall. "I shouldn't have hit him. He'll use it against us." "Maybe, or maybe the judge will understand a mother bear protecting her cub." He pressed his lips to her hair. "Either way, I'm proud of you. That boy couldn't ask for fiercer love." The hearing was set for the next week. Timothy's fever had broken, but he remained weak, clinging to Clara whenever allowed. The whole situation felt like a storm waiting to break Palmer with his Eastern lawyers and smooth words them with their cobbled-together family and community support. But as Clara tucked Timothy into bed at the boarding house the night before they'd leave for Cheyenne, he whispered something that strengthened her resolve. "Mama, I remember what my first mama said when she was sick. She said to find someone who'd love me when I was difficult, not just when I was easy. She said that was real family." His thin arms wrapped around her neck. "You and Papa Jonah love me even when I'm sick and scared. That means we're real family, right?" "The realest," Clara promised, holding him close. Tomorrow they'd face judges and lawyers, propriety and prejudice. But tonight, in this small room in a boarding house that had once rejected her, Clara Hollins, Rourke knew exactly who she was. A mother, a wife, a woman who'd found her place by refusing to fit into anyone else's definition of it. And that truth, she believed, would speak louder than any Boston lawyer's polished arguments. It had to, because Timothy deserved more than wealth and propriety. He deserved love that didn't calculate cost, family that chose him daily, and the chance to grow tall and strong and maybe a little too much for conventional society's comfort. Just like his mother. The storm struck the night before they were to leave for Cheyenne. Not snow this time, but freezing rain that turned the world into glass. Clara woke to the sound of ice pelting the boarding house windows, and Timothy crying out in the grip of another nightmare. Mrs. Winters met her at the door, face drawn with worry. "He's been calling for you all night. The fever's back." Clara found Timothy huddled in his bedskin, burning the careful progress of the past week erased. His breathing came in short, labored gasps that sent fear shooting through her chest. "Mama's here," she soothed, but her hands trembled as she felt his forehead. "I'm here, sweet boy." Jonah arrived shortly after bringing Doc Morrison, despite the treacherous streets. The doctor's examination was thorough and his conclusion grim. Pneumonia. Early stages, but moving fast. He met Clara's eyes. "He can't travel. Not in this weather, not in this condition." "The hearing," Clara began. "We'll have to proceed without him, or be postponed." Morrison packed his bag. "Keep him warm. Get fluids in him when you can. I'll check back this afternoon." Palmer appeared an hour later, dry despite the storm. His hotel was next door. His satisfaction at seeing Timothy ill made Clara's hands clench. "Unfortunate," he said, not sounding sorry at all. "But the hearing will proceed. The law doesn't wait for childhood sniffles." "Pneumonia isn't sniffles," Jonah growled. Palmer shrugged. Perhaps this illness is a sign. The boy clearly needs better care than frontier living can provide. Boston has excellent hospitals, trained nurses. Boston has you, Clara interrupted, which negates any advantage it might offer. Palmer's eyes narrowed. Tomorrow, Mrs. Rourke, your play acting at Motherhood ends. That boy comes with me sick or well. After he left, Clara made a decision. Go to Cheyenne, she told Jonah. Take the others, present our case. I'm staying with Timothy. Clara, he needs me here. The judge will have to understand. She gripped Jonah's hands. Take the letter from his mother. Take the will information. Make them see what Palmer really is. Jonah's jaw worked. Splitting up feels wrong, like we're giving Palmer an advantage. Letting Timothy face this illness alone would be worse. Clara straightened, finding strength in certainty. We've been fighting for the right to be his parents. Now I need to actually be his mother, even if it costs us legally. That night, as the storm raged and Timothy fought for breath, Fox Hollow surprised them again. Despite the dangerous streets, people arrived. Ming Chen with herbal remedies her grandmother had taught her. Samuel Hart with extra blankets from his store. Reverend Mills to pray not formally, but sitting quietly, adding his faith to their hope. Even more surprisingly, 3 women Clara barely knew appeared mothers who'd watched her these past months, judged her, and apparently reconsidered. Heard the boy was sick, Martha Crawford said simply. She'd been one of the whispers, one of the voices calling Clara unnatural. My youngest had pneumonia last winter. This helped. She handed over a jar of pungent salve. Rub it on his chest every few hours. Helps the breathing. The women took turns through the night spelling Clara so she could rest, sharing remedies and stories. As dawn broke gray and bitter, Timothy's breathing had eased slightly. The fever still raged, but he was fighting. Why? Clara asked Martha as they changed Timothy's sweat-soaked bedding. Why help now? Martha's weathered face showed years of frontier-living children raised in lost dreams adjusted to harsh realities. Been watching you, how you work, how you stand up for folks, how that man of yours looks at you like you hung the moon. She smoothed Timothy's blanket with practiced hands. Maybe you are different, but different isn't always wrong, and any fool can see you love that boy true. The day of the hearing dawned clear and brutal cold. The ice storm had passed, leaving a world crystallized and treacherous. Jonah prepared to leave with their supporters, his reluctance obvious. I should stay. You should fight. Clara kissed him, tasting his fear and determination. I'll fight here, you fight there. That's what partners do. After the delegation left for Cheyenne, Clara settled beside Timothy's bed. His fever had stabilized, but not broken. He drifted in and out of consciousness, sometimes calling for his birth parents, sometimes for her and Jonah. Each labored breath was a small victory. Each hour survived a blessing. Palmer visited once, studying the sick child with calculation rather than concern. My lawyers are confident, he said. A sick child, a mother who won't even attend the hearing, it speaks to negligence. Clara didn't waste energy on response. Let him gloat. She had more important battles to fight, measured in spoonfuls of broth, coaxed between fevered lips in cool cloths on burning skin, in whispered stories when Timothy surfaced enough to listen. The afternoon brought unexpected visitors. Judge Harrison himself, travel-worn and irritated, accompanied by Sheriff Coleman and a court clerk. Mrs. Rourke, the judge said, removing his hat. Your husband made quite an impression, as did half of Fox Hollow apparently. Never had so many people crowd my courtroom. Clara's heart leapt, but she kept her voice steady. And the hearing? Postponed. The judge studied Timothy with surprisingly gentle eyes. I don't make decisions about children without seeing them, understanding their circumstances. Mr. Palmer objected, of course. Said I was letting emotion override law. What did you say? That law without compassion is just tyranny with paperwork. Harrison pulled up a chair, settling his considerable bulk with a sigh. Tell me about your son, Mrs. Rourke. Not the legal facts, I have those. Tell me about the boy. So Clara did. About Timothy's courage walking to town alone. His determination to help with chores despite weakness. How he'd started calling them Mama and Papa not from prompting but from need. His nightmares and his recoveries. his quick mind and generous heart. As she spoke, Timothy stirred, focusing blearily on the strangers. His hand found Clara's, clinging tight. "Mama," he whispered, "are they taking me away?" "No, sweet boy. This is Judge Harrison. He came to meet you." Timothy struggled to sit up, ingrained politeness fighting illness. "Hello, sir. Are you going to send me to Boston?" Harrison leaned forward. "Do you want to go to Boston, son?" "No." Despite his weakness, Timothy's voice carried conviction. "Boston has Uncle Edwin. He grabbed me. He scared me. I want to stay with Mama Clara and Papa Jonah. They chose me. They didn't have to, but they chose me." "And if you had to choose?" Harrison asked gently. "Between Boston's comfort and Fox Hollow's challenges?" Timothy's grip on Clara's hand tightened. "Papa Jonah says the best things are worth fighting for. Like when he found me in the snow. He fought the cold to save me, and Mama Clara fights for me every day, even when people say mean things about her being too tall." His young face showed wisdom earned through loss. "Love that fights is better than money that doesn't care." Harrison nodded slowly. Out of the mouths of babes. He stood, decision made. "Mrs. Rourke, I'll be ruling tomorrow. Mr. Palmer can wait. Tonight, focus on your boy." After they left, Clara allowed herself tears of hope. Timothy had spoken for himself, shown his heart. Surely that mattered more than Palmer's legal maneuvering. Through the night she kept vigil. The other women came and went, bringing food remedies, quiet support. Near dawn, as Clara dozed in her chair, she felt the change, Timothy's skin cooling, his breathing deeper. The fever had broken. "Mama," his voice was weak but clear. "You stayed." "Always," she promised. "Always." Jonah arrived as the sun painted Fox Hollow gold. He burst into the room, gathering both Clara and Timothy in an embrace that spoke of fear-conquered battles won. "The judge," Clara asked against his chest. "Ruled an hour ago. Timothy stays with us. Palmer's on a train east, cursing frontier justice and promising appeals that won't go anywhere." Jonah pulled back to look at them both, his wife drawn from sleepless nights, his son pale but breathing easier. "We won." Timothy's smile was worth every hard moment. "We're really family now, forever?" "We always were," Clara said. "The judge just made it official." Later, as Timothy slept peacefully for the first time in days, Jonah told Clara the details. How her letter had swayed the judge. How Fox Hollow's testimony had painted a picture of community and care. How Palmer's own words had condemned him, speaking of Timothy as property rather than person. But mostly, Jonah said, Harrison said he was influenced by a mother who chose her child's sickbed over a courtroom. Said any fool could see where Timothy belonged. Clara leaned into her husband's warmth, exhaustion finally claiming her. They'd won more than a legal battle. They'd proved that family wasn't about blood or propriety or Eastern respectability. It was about choosing each other again and again in sickness and health against odds and opposition. Outside, Fox Hollow went about its business, imperfect, prejudiced in many ways, but capable of growth. Inside the boarding house room, 3 souls who'd been labeled too much or too little or too different rested in the certainty of belonging to each other. The storm had passed. Spring would come, and Timothy would grow tall in a home built on choice rather than chance, surrounded by love that had proved itself in the hardest currency, showing up, staying put, fighting for the right to be called family. Clara's last thought before sleep took her was a prayer of gratitude, not for easy paths or conventional acceptance, but for the harder gift of finding where she fit by refusing to fit anywhere else. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight her family was safe, complete, and legally recognized. For a woman once called too much, it was exactly enough. Spring arrived gently that year, coaxing green from the prairie grass and filling the air with the scent of wildflowers. Clara stood in the doorway of their cabin, watching Timothy help Jonah repair the chicken coop. The boy had grown 2 inches since his illness, his face losing the hollow look of winter hardship. "Hold it steady now," Jonah instructed, his large hands guiding Timothy's smaller ones. "That's it. You're getting stronger every day." Clara smiled at the sight, then returned to her sewing. The order from town had grown. Word of her skill had spread beyond Fox Hollow, bringing requests for everything from wedding dresses to work clothes. She'd converted a corner of the cabin into a workspace, though most days found her outside when weather permitted. Mama Clara. Timothy appeared at her elbow, dirt smudged across his nose. Papa Jonah says I can go to town with him tomorrow to get supplies and maybe, he paused hopefully, peppermint sticks. If you finish your letters tonight without complaint, Clara bargained, ruffling his hair. The boy's education had become her project, using books borrowed from Reverend Mills and her own memories of schooling. That evening brought an unexpected visitor. A woman approached on horseback, riding with the confidence of someone born to the saddle. She dismounted at their gate, revealing herself to be perhaps 30, with sun-weathered skin and direct gray eyes. "I'm looking for Clara Rourke," she announced. "I'm Clara." She set aside her sewing, noting Jonah's watchful stance by the barn. "How can I help you?" "Name's Elizabeth Hartley. I run a ranch about 15 miles north. Heard about you from Samuel Hart. Says you're the best seamstress in 3 counties and not afraid of hard work." Clara inclined her head, waiting. Ranch women rarely made social calls. "I need help," Elizabeth continued bluntly. "Not just with sewing. My husband died last winter, horse through him. I've got 3 hands who respect me well enough, but I need someone who can help manage the house handle accounts, maybe teach my daughter her letters. Someone strong enough for ranch life. I have a family here, Mrs. Hartley. A son, a husband. Bring them. I've got a foreman's cottage sitting empty. Your man knows horses." At Clara's nod, Elizabeth pressed on. "Then I could use him too. I pay fair, provide housing, and I don't care if a woman's too tall or too anything else, long as she works hard." Clara glanced at Jonah, who'd moved closer during the conversation. His expression was thoughtful rather than dismissive. "We'd need to discuss it," Clara said carefully. "Expected as much, but think on it," Elizabeth remounted with easy grace. "Spring roundup's coming. Could use folks I can trust before then." After she left, Clara and Jonah sat by the fire while Timothy practiced his letters. The scratch of his pencil filled the comfortable silence. "It's good land up that way," Jonah said eventually, "and the Hartley Ranch has a solid reputation. You'd consider it leaving here? This cabin was always meant to be temporary, a place to hide from the world." He watched Timothy's tongue poking out in concentration. "But we're not hiding anymore. We're building. Maybe it's time to build something bigger." Clara understood. The cabin had been refuge, but it was also isolation. Timothy needed other children consistent schooling, and the offer represented something she'd never had recognition of her worth beyond charity or desperation. "I'll need to know more," she said, "about her, the ranch, what she really needs. Then we'll go visit, all of us, see what's what." 3 days later, they made the journey. The Hartley Ranch sprawled across prime grassland with well-maintained buildings and the purposeful activity of a working operation. Elizabeth met them at the main house, her daughter Sarah at her side, a girl of perhaps 8 with her mother's direct gaze. "This is what I need," Elizabeth said without preamble, leading them through the house. "Someone to help run this while I handle the cattle operation. Accounts, supplies, managing the household. Teaching Sarah, who's smart but wild as a Mustang." The house was large but neglected, showing the wear of a widower's winter. Clara could see the potential rooms that could shine with care spaces where a family could grow. "And the cottage?" Jonah asked. Elizabeth led them to a sturdy building set apart from the bunkhouse. 2 bedrooms, a main room, a kitchen with a good stove. Smaller than the main house, but larger than their cabin with windows facing the mountains. "Previous foreman left when my husband died. Said he wouldn't work for a woman." Elizabeth's smile was sharp. "His loss." Timothy and Sarah had wandered off together, the girl showing him the barn cats. Their laughter drifted across the yard, easy and natural. "What aren't you telling us?" Clara asked. "A spread like this, you could hire anyone. Why us?" Elizabeth studied her woman to woman. "Because you know what it's like to not fit, to be looked at sideways, to have to be twice as good to be considered half as worthy." She gestured to the ranch. "This is my life's work. My husband respected that, supported it. But since he died, I've had men trying to buy me out, marry me off, or simply take over. I need people who understand that a woman can run more than a kitchen." Clara felt Jonah's hand find hers, a silent communication. They'd been strangers who'd built trust. Perhaps that could happen again. "1-month trial," Clara proposed. "We keep our cabin in case things don't work out. Fair wages from the start, and Timothy continues his education." "Done." Elizabeth's handshake was firm as any man's. "When can you start?" The move happened quickly. Fox Hollow's reactions were mixed, some sorry to see them go, others muttering about Clara rising above herself. But the Chens promised to visit. Samuel Hart offered to handle supply runs, and even Mrs. Winters pressed a jar of preserves into Clara's hands. "You changed things here," the older woman said gruffly. "Might not all be grateful for it, but change was needed." The ranch work proved demanding but satisfying. Clara managed the house accounts with the same precision she'd brought to the mills, finding ways to economize without sacrificing quality. She taught Sarah alongside Timothy, the two children becoming fast friends despite their different backgrounds. Jonah thrived in the open work, his knowledge of horses and land proving invaluable. The ranch hands, initially skeptical, soon learned to respect his quiet competence. In the evenings, their cottage became a gathering place, Elizabeth joining them for supper, the children playing while adults discussed plans for improvement. "I had my doubts," Elizabeth admitted one evening as they watched sunset paint the mountains gold. "Hiring a woman to help run things. Thought it might make the men respect me less." "And," Clara prompted. "Opposite happened. They see you working dawn to dusk, managing books and kitchen and children without complaint. Makes them less likely to grumble when I give orders." She smiled. "Plus your husband has a way of making his opinion known without saying much." It was true. Jonah had quietly discouraged several men who'd thought to court the wealthy widow, his mere presence a deterrent to unwanted advances. But the real test came during spring roundup. Elizabeth had to be gone for 2 weeks, trusting Clara with the ranch's daily operations. The responsibility was immense, managing supplies for the cowboys, ensuring the household ran smoothly, handling unexpected crises. The first crisis came 3 days in. Sarah, trying to prove she was as capable as Timothy, attempted to ride a half-broken colt. The fall could have been catastrophic, but Clara reached her in time, pulling her from the corral as the colt's hooves struck where she'd been. "You could have been killed," Clara said, her voice shaking as she held the sobbing girl. I wanted to show I was brave, like you." Clara knelt, meeting Sarah's eyes. "Brave isn't about taking foolish risks. Brave is admitting when you need help, when you need to learn more before trying something dangerous." The second crisis was quieter but more profound. Going through the ranch papers Elizabeth had entrusted to her, Clara discovered irregularities. The previous foreman had been skimming, selling cattle on the side and pocketing the profits. The evidence was clear in the doctored books. When Elizabeth returned, dusty and exhausted, but satisfied with the roundup, Clara presented her finding. Elizabeth's face went hard as flint. "That's why he really left. Knew I'd catch on eventually." She studied the evidence Clara had meticulously compiled. "This is enough to have him arrested." "What will you do?" Elizabeth's smile was predatory. "Send word to every ranch in 3 territories. He'll never work cattle again." She clasped Clara's shoulder. "You've more than earned your place here. Both of you, all of you." That night in their cottage, as Timothy slept and spring rain drummed the roof, Clara and Jonah talked about permanence, about futures, about the strange paths that led to belonging. "Never thought I'd work for another strong woman," Jonah mused. "But Elizabeth reminds me of you. Refuses to shrink for anyone's comfort." Clara curled into his warmth. "Are you happy here? It's not the solitude you sought." "I sought solitude because I'd lost everything worth connecting to." His arms tightened around her. "Now I've got you, Timothy, work that matters. Even got a bossy 8-year-old teaching our son to rope calves. That's worth more than any mountain hermitage." Clara smiled against his chest. From too tall to too valuable, from unwelcome to essential. The journey hadn't been what she'd expected when she'd stepped off that train in Fox Hollow. But perhaps that was the point. The best lives were built Not from plans, but from choosing growth over safety connection, over isolation. The difficult path of becoming who you were meant to be. Outside, the rain gentled into spring shower. Inside, a family that had begun in crisis and continued through choice settled into sleep, secure in the knowledge that they'd found not just shelter but home, not just work but purpose, not just acceptance but appreciation for exactly who they were. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, cattle to tend, children to teach, a ranch to help run. But tonight Clara Rourke allowed herself the luxury of contentment. Her husband's heartbeat steady beneath her ear, their son safe in the next room, their future spreading before them as wide and full of promise as the prairie itself. The spring fair came to Fox Hollow on a day when the sky stretched endless blue, and the air carried promises of summer. Clara adjusted her new dress, a deep sapphire that brought out her eyes, sewn by her own hands from fabric Elizabeth had insisted she take. "You look beautiful, Mama." Timothy said, his own appearance transformed by proper feeding and care. He'd grown sturdy in their year at the ranch, his face sun-kissed and healthy. "Handsome yourself," Clara replied, straightening his collar. "Ready to show Fox Hollow how much you've grown." It was their first return since moving to the Hartley Ranch. Elizabeth had given them the day off, insisting they needed to maintain connections with the town that had, despite everything, become part of their story. Jonah drove the wagon cleaned and polished for the occasion. As they rolled into Fox Hollow, Clara noticed the changes, new buildings, fresh paint on old ones, an air of prosperity that hadn't existed before. "Place is growing," Jonah observed. At the fairgrounds, they encountered familiar faces immediately. Ming Chen rushed to embrace Clara, exclaiming over Timothy's growth. Samuel Hart shook Jonah's hand warmly, discussing the new merchandise he'd acquired from Denver. But it was the reactions of others that struck Clara most. Women who'd once whispered now nodded respectfully. Men who'd dismissed her acknowledged her presence. The change wasn't universal. Some still looked askance at her height, her strength, her refusal to diminish herself. But there was a shift, subtle yet real. Mrs. Rourke. A young woman approached holding a baby. Clara recognized her as Anna Paulson, who'd arrived in Fox Hollow recently with her husband. "Mrs. Chen told me about you. Said you might help with sewing work." As Clara discussed potential projects with Anna, she caught sight of a familiar figure. Patrick Gentry stood near the general store, looking older, more worn. Their eyes met across the crowded fairground. For a moment, Clara tensed. Then Patrick approached, hat in hand. "Mrs. Rourke," he said formally. "I heard that is news travels. You've done well." Clara studied him, this man who'd promised her a life, then fled rather than face her. "I have. I owe you an apology. What I did leaving that letter running it was cowardly." He glanced at Jonah, who watched with neutral eyes. "I was afraid of what people would think of how you'd challenge things." "And now," Clara kept her voice even, "now I see I was a fool. You've built something real here, made the town better from what I hear." Patrick's smile was rueful. "I came back hoping to restart my practice, but Fox Hollow already has the doctor it needs. Seems I'm the one who doesn't fit anymore." He left shortly after, and Clara felt only distant pity. He'd been a catalyst, nothing more. Without his cowardice, she'd never have found Jonah, never claimed Timothy, never discovered her own strength. "You all right?" Jonah asked quietly. "Perfect," Clara said, meaning it. "Let's show our son the fair." They wandered through the festivities, Timothy wide-eyed at the puppet show, Jonah winning Clara a ribbon at the shooting contest, all three sharing cider and fresh donuts. It was during the dance exhibition that the next surprise came. "Ladies and gentlemen," the caller announced, "we need couples for the Virginia Reel. Come now, don't be shy." Before Clara could protest, Jonah had taken her hand, leading her to the cleared space. Other couples joined the Chens, surprising everyone with their participation, young newlyweds, established families. "I don't," Clara began. "Trust me," Jonah said, and she did. The music started fiddle bright and banjo steady. Clara had danced in Philadelphia, but always awkwardly too tall for most partners, too conscious of taking up space. But with Jonah, her height was an asset. They moved together with surprising grace, his strength matching hers, creating a balance that drew admiring glances. As they promenaded down the line, Clara caught reflections in watching faces. Not the pity or mockery she'd once expected, but something else: recognition, perhaps even envy. Here was partnership visible, two people who fit not because they were identical, but because their differences created harmony. Timothy cheered from the sidelines, Sarah Hartley beside him. Elizabeth had brought her to the fair for a treat. The girl watched Clara with shining eyes, seeing possibility in a woman who commanded space without apology. When the dance ended, breathless and laughing, Clara found herself surrounded. Women asking about her dressmaking, men respectfully discussing ranch business, with Jonah children pestering Timothy about his adventures. She'd become, without quite noticing, someone people sought out rather than avoided. Later, as afternoon mellowed toward evening, they picnicked by the creek. Timothy had run off with other children, his laughter carrying on the warm air. Jonah lounged against a cottonwood, Clara beside him, her head on his shoulder. "Regrets?" he asked, fingers playing with a strand of her hair that had escaped its pins. "About what?" "Not being the doctor's wife, not having the life you planned." Clara considered. "I planned for a life that would accept me if I made myself smaller. Instead, I got one that celebrates me as I am." She tilted her face up to his. "No regrets, only gratitude." He kissed her then, there in public, not caring who saw. When they parted, Clara noticed several young women watching with interest rather than scandal. Perhaps Fox Hollow was learning that love came in many forms, not all of them conventional. As the sun lowered, painting the fair in golden light, prizes were announced. Clara had entered a quilt in the needlework competition, intricate work completed during winter evenings, telling in fabric the story of paths, converging families, forming homes building. "First prize," the judge announced, "goes to Clara Rourke for exceptional craftsmanship and storytelling through stitchwork." As she accepted the blue ribbon, applause genuine around her, Clara thought about stories, the ones we tell ourselves, the ones others tell about us, and the ones we create through living. Her story had begun with rejection, with being too much for narrow definitions. But she'd refused to accept that ending. Walking back through the fair, Timothy's hand in hers and Jonah steady beside her, Clara noticed Patrick Gentry preparing to leave town. His wagon loaded with possessions. He'd found no place in the Fox Hollow that had grown beyond him. Meanwhile, she, too tall, too strong, too much, had helped shape that growth. "Mama Clara," Timothy tugged her hand. "Look, fireflies." They paused to watch the lights dance in gathering dusk, tiny sparks defying darkness. Timothy chased them laughing, while Jonah and Clara stood close, needing no words. Tomorrow, they'd return to the ranch to work and responsibility and the daily business of building a life. There would be challenges, droughts, and harsh winters. Timothy's continuing education, the complexities of helping Elizabeth maintain her independence in a world that preferred widows to remarry or retreat. But tonight, in a town that had once rejected her, surrounded by proof of how far they'd all come, Clara Rourke stood tall, not in defiance, but in simple truth. She was exactly who she was meant to be: mother, wife, friend, worker, woman. Neither too much nor too little, but precisely enough. "Ready to head home?" Jonah asked as the fair began winding down. Home. Not just the ranch cottage, but the life they'd built, the family they'd chosen, the future they were creating day by day. "Yes," Clara said, gathering Timothy close as he returned from his firefly hunt. "Let's go home." As their wagon rolled out of Fox Hollow, Clara looked back once. The town twinkled with lanterns, alive with community that had learned to stretch its definitions. She'd arrived here broken by rejection. She was leaving whole, not because Fox Hollow had accepted her, but because she'd accepted herself. And that she knew, as Jonah's hand found hers in the darkness and Timothy sang softly in the wagon bed, was the greatest transformation of all. Not fitting in, but standing out. Not shrinking down, but rising up. Not being loved despite her differences, but because of them. The stars emerged overhead, the same ones Jonah had taught Timothy to navigate by. Clara smiled, remembering that first cold night when a stranger had offered shelter to a woman with nowhere to go. Now she had everywhere to go, everything to be everyone she needed. The wagon rolled on through prairie darkness toward home, carrying three souls who'd found each other in the vast wilderness of chance and chosen to stay found. Behind them, Fox Hollow settled into night. Ahead, the ranch waited with its promises of dawn and work and purpose. And Clara Rourke, too tall, too strong, too much, and finally perfectly enough, rode toward tomorrow with her whole heart, knowing that the best stories weren't about fitting in, but about finding where you belong, even if you have to build that place yourself, one choice at a time. Thank you so much for listening to this Wild West love story. I hope Clara and Jonah's journey touched your heart as much as it touched mine while sharing it. Please comment below and let me know where in the world you're listening from. I love connecting with listeners from different places and hearing your thoughts about the story. If you enjoyed this tale of love, acceptance, and finding where you belong, please subscribe to Wild West Stories 1850 and hit that like button. And if you really want to help more people discover these heartfelt frontier stories, please press the hype button to boost this video. Your support means everything and helps me continue bringing these emotional journeys from the American frontier to life. Until our next story, partners,